Well, welcome everyone to our second CFE support webinar, Understanding the CFE. My name is Debbie Bailiff. Before I start, again, I'd like to extend a warm welcome, a big thank you to CPA Western School of Business, CPA Ontario, and CPA Atlantic School of Business for ensuring that this valuable information is available to you as you prepare to write CFE in June. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to your area or region. I've enclosed their email addresses here. I know that one of the common questions candidates ask is, will the slides be available for this particular presentation? Unfortunately, none of the slides are available for any of the CFE support webinar series. But the great news is you have access to the recordings. So you have the ability to stop the recording at any time and make appropriate notes. So our goal today is to ensure that you have a clear understanding of what the expectations are when you write CFE. A common analogy I like to use is to think of things, and when you're writing CFE, to think of it in kind of in terms of a game. And in order to play a game well, the first thing you need to understand is, what are the rules? In this instance, what are the expectations? And then you need to figure out an appropriate strategy, because the goal is you want to win the game. And in this instance, the goal is you want to pass CFE. So as a result, our objectives today, we're going to spend time reviewing the structure of the common final exam, or what we always refer to as CFE. Going to spend quite a bit of time ensuring that you have a clear understanding of the passing profile of a candidate. I'm going to talk about the different approaches because they are different for day 1 versus day 2 and day 3. And as always, I'm going to provide you with some additional resources that I'm sure you will find valuable. So as you know, CFE consists of it's a 3-day exam. Day 1 is 4 hours, day 2 is 5 hours, and day 3 is 4 hours. And throughout that time, you're being tested on your ability to demonstrate the required depth. So that's the level of detail, and breadth. So from a quantitative perspective, the number of correct inputs. From a qualitative perspective, the number of appropriate qualitative factors in accordance with CPA competency map. So it's very important that you understand under each of the technical competencies, what are the kind of tasks that you could be tested on. If you haven't had an opportunity already, I strongly recommend that you watch the stress management webinar, because during that webinar, I shared a best practice on how you can take the Excel version, the Excel tool of the competency map, and sort it by proficiency level. So make sure that you watch that. So let's talk about day 1. Day 1 is a comprehensive case. It's based on the Capstone 1 case, so it's a few years later. So for those of you who are writing the first time, you're most likely going to write Carnet Bread Company case. For those of you who are rewriting, you probably have chosen Viviana. And what's happening is, it's a few years later, they will tell you what strategic option or options they implemented. And it could be options that were part of the Capstone 1 case, or it could be one of the options in the Capstone 1 case and something completely different. You will assume the same role. So in both instances, you are a consultant. And now the board of directors is looking to you for some valuable strategic advice. So they're asking you again to analyze some strategic options and potentially operational issues, and to provide them with overall recommendations. So you will need to perform both a quantitative and qualitative analysis. Your quantitative analysis is not as in-depth in any way as it was in Capstone 1 case. Your focus is not as much on your technical abilities as it is on your ability to provide business advice. Day one, you're being tested on your ability to provide sound strategic advice, which means that you have to be able to demonstrate that you have a clear understanding of the internal and external environment in which the company operates and how that impacts your analysis of those strategic options and your overall recommendations. Day two is also one comprehensive case. It's the same case for everyone. Now, it's long. It ranges anywhere from 50, 60 pages or more. But let's reduce that stress rate off now, because I know when you first look at your first day two case, it becomes very stressful. But remember that that information is sorted and it gives you your given information that's for each of the roles. So whether you're going to specialize in audit and assurance, in tax, finance, or performance management. So some of that information is not relevant for you. The requirements are usually clearly defined. So, in other words, they're saying CPA, could you please advise? Could you please analyze? When it comes to your technical, what we call your common assessment opportunities. So, those are financial reporting and management accounting. You're going to be tested at the core level. And just so you know, in day one, you're also being tested at the core level. But when it comes to your role specific, so those assessment opportunities, required or asks, I use those words interchangeably, you're going to be tested at the proficiency level for the elective. So there's much more depth and level of detail required. The information, as I said, is organized by role and it's done alphabetically. So if your role is audit and assurance, then you're just going to look at the pages that either refer to common information for everyone or the information that only refers to audit and assurance. Day three is a multi-subject cases. So you will have between 3 or 4 cases. They range anywhere from minimum 45 minutes to maximum of 90 minutes. You will be tested at the core level across all 6 technical competencies. So financial reporting, management accounting, strategy and governance, finance, audit and assurance, and tax. Excuse me. In this instance, the requireds, what they're asking you to do are less directive. What does that mean? It means that they might not specifically say, CPA, could you please analyze this or could you please advise? An example of something that is undirected could be that the user tells you that they received a $50,000 signing bonus and that they've recorded revenue at the time of receiving the money. They didn't ask you to analyze that financial reporting issue, but you know, based on the case facts, you need to analyze it. There could be more integration. And what that means is your analysis and your recommendation of one assessment opportunity impacts your analysis of another. So let me give you an example. A very common one is maybe you may be asked to calculate materiality. Well, if there are any financial reporting assessment opportunities, you need to do those first, analyze them, make your recommendation, and make the appropriate adjustments before you calculate materiality. There's a heavy focus on your technical analysis. Now, day three, too, just to let you know, this is the time that many candidates feel the time crunch the most. So, again, as I provided advice under stress management, make sure as you're practicing those cases that you're completing them within the time frame that you're given. Because ultimately, in CFE, you need to complete all of the assessment opportunities to the best of your ability within the time frame you're given. So in 2020, the Board of Examiners, for the very first time, provided us with some valuable insights of what the passing profile for a candidate looks like for combined day 2 and day 3. Day 1 is marked independently and differently, so I'm going to go through that shortly. But let's look at the passing profile for that combined day 2 and day 3. There are 4 different levels. The first level, level 1, is what they call a sufficiency test. And what they're looking at is all of the assessment opportunities spread over day 2 and day 3. They're going to account and only consider the assessment opportunities that you achieved reaching competent, or higher. And they assign a score to each of those. And what they're looking for is they've set an undisclosed score that you must achieve in order to pass level 1. Level 2 and level 3 are what we call depth tests. And in that, for level 2, they're only going to consider the number of assessment opportunities that you achieved competent or higher in financial reporting or management accounting. Now you have to meet this undisclosed number of competent responses, and it's for either financial reporting or management accounting. You don't need to meet both. However, I am going to share with you that because I notice some candidates, they're either really strong in financial reporting or really strong in management accounting, but not necessarily in both. I'm going to show you that it's important to make sure when you're putting together your study plan that you're spending time on both because it does have an impact when it comes to level 1. And I'll show you that shortly. When it comes to level 4, that's what we call a breadth test. And in that aspect, they're looking at the undisclosed number of assessment opportunities that you've achieved across and under every different enabling competency. And what that means is you can't avoid a technical competency. We find some candidates, tax is it's something they're not comfortable with, and they just always seem to put off studying or put off doing the assessment opportunities. Well, that could be to your detriment. And again, I'll share that as we go through. So already I've talked about an assessment opportunity as being assessed as reaching competent or competent. Let's go through the assessment ratings. It could be NA, so you didn't address it at all. It could be, your rating could be NC, which is nominal competent. And what that means is your response for that assessment opportunity was very superficial. And most likely you didn't meet the depth, so the level of detail required, and you didn't meet the breadth, so the number of correct inputs or the number of appropriate qualitative factors. Reaching competent most likely means that you met one of those, whether it's breadth or depth, but you were missing the other. Competent means that you've met the expectations when it comes to both breadth and depth. Competent with distinction means you've exceeded those expectations. So when it comes to the assessment opportunities, they're designed in such a way that the question that the Board of Examiners asks is, what would a competent entry-level CPA do in these circumstances? So they're all based on a proficiency level that's required for an entry-level CPA. So to attain a pass, Candidates must address the issues. They always refer to the cases as the simulations that are considered significant. So the focus is on the things that are significant. So again, let's go further into depth of this passing profile. This particular visual indicates that you must pass all 4 levels to be able to pass your combined day 2 and day 3. So we're accountants. Let's use some hypothetical numbers. Now, these, I want to be very clear. This information that I'm providing you is in no way reflective of what the Board of Examiners and the exam writers use. But let's assume, so we know level 1 is that undisclosed score. Let's assume that there's a possibility of a total of 100 points that could be rewarded. And so that the Board of Examiners says, in order for a candidate to pass level 1, and that's going to be the combined score of any of the assessment opportunities that you've had reaching competent or higher, that you need to achieve a minimum score of 80. So I want to share an interpretation of this level 1 scoring. So for those of you who are enrolled in Capstone 2, as you start to write your cases, you will notice when it comes to day 2 and day 3 feedback guide, at the bottom of the feedback guide, there will be a scoring. This is the interpretation that the CPA Capstone 2 education team uses. Now, I want to be very clear. The education team and CPA exam team, they do not communicate with each other. So the education team does not know what and how this scoring is used when it comes to the actual exam. However, we can deduct some important information from here to use as at some fundamental principles. So first of all, I'm very comfortable in the fact that we know that they're not going to give you any points if you haven't addressed something or nominal competency for level 1 because they're only looking at reaching competent or higher. So 0 points are awarded. One of the principles is we know that the point value, we don't know what it is between reaching competent and competent, but there's a higher point value awarded for a competent response. So the education team uses 1 point if your assessment opportunity is reaching competent and uses 2 points if you achieve a competent or a competent with distinction. So a very important principle that we can deduct from here is, again, achieving a competent response is going to increase your chances of achieving that undisclosed scoring. Another thing that's important is there's no difference in points awarded, whether your response is competent or competent with distinction. So again, fundamental principle, complete all the assessment opportunities within the time frame that you have. So you have to practice doing that because that increases your chances of meeting the requirements for level 1, because that's an area many candidates struggle with. So for level 2, say that maybe hypothetically the expectation is that you have to achieve 20 competent when it comes to either financial reporting or management accounting. When it comes to your role specific, say maybe you have to achieve 30 times a competent response for your role specific. When it comes to level 4, so again, they're looking at reaching competent or higher, and say that you have to achieve reaching competent 25 times. However, there's a caveat. Within each of those technical competencies, you have to address, say, you have to get 5 reaching competent for each of those areas. So again, if you're avoiding a particular competency area, technical competency area, this is not an effective strategy Because if you're avoiding tax, which unfortunately I have seen happen, I've seen candidates who've passed level 1, level 2, level 3, everything that was required in level 4 except tax. And as a result, they did not pass. They did not meet the passing profile for day 2 and day 3. So they needed to rewrite it again. So again, please make sure that you go through all of those technical competencies and make sure that you understand what is testable. So I've created this visual just to give you a really good sense of the power of achieving a competent response. So first of all, we know if you achieve an NA or an NC, no points are going to be awarded across any of the levels. Say if you achieve a reaching competent in any of the technical areas, then I'm going to use that 1 point versus 2 points, again, for illustration purposes only. So you would get 1 point towards your level 1. Plus, for level 4, depending, you'll get 1. It'll count towards one of your requirements. If it was a financial reporting issue, then it would account under financial reporting. The same principle would apply for management accounting. If you achieve a competent in a financial reporting um, assessment opportunity, then let's say you get 2 points awarded when it comes to level 1. And excellent, you're going to get, that's going to be counted towards your depth in level 2. Plus, you're also going to be awarded and accounted towards your reaching competent in a higher, that undisclosed number for level 4. The same principle applies for competent in management accounting. Now let's look at an example for a role specific. I'm going to use an example for performance management. So say you get a competent on a performance management assessment opportunity. There's your 2 points under level 1, plus that's going towards that undisclosed number of competent responses that you need in your role specific, plus that's going to go through to your level 4. Now, I want to be very clear. When it comes to your role, the only day that you have an opportunity to meet the requirements for level 3, your role specific, is day 2. So let me repeat that again. The only day that you can demonstrate the depth in your role specific and attempt to meet the requirements for level 3 is in day 2. So it is critical that you complete all of your assessment opportunities for your role. If you don't, that means that you will not, or that increases your chances of not passing level 3, which again, if you don't pass one of those levels, you will have to rewrite day 2 and day 3. So here is a breakdown of the assessment opportunity. So I've taken this is the same breakdown that the Board of Examiners have shared when for the September 2023 and the May 2024 CFE. For the role specific, there were 7 assessment opportunities. For financial reporting and management accounting, there were 6 each. And then for the other technical areas, there were 3 under strategy and governance, 3 for audit and insurance, and 3 for finance, and 3 for tax. So there were a total of 31. Let's just look at that chart for a second. Just purely by math, if you choose and say financial reporting is what I'm very good at and I'm really not going to spend much time in management accounting, that isn't a sound strategy because there's the same number of assessment opportunities, or at least there has been in the past. There has been the same number of financial reporting issues as there have been management accounting issues. So again, this shows that your role financial reporting, and management accounting are very important. But for level 4, you've got to achieve at least that undisclosed reaching competent across all the technical areas. So I want to talk about the approach because there's different approaches for day 1, day 2, and day 3. Now, I want to let you know that I'm going into greater detail. There's going to be some live webinars. So I'm going to do day 1 workshops. So I'm going to really show that approach. I'm going to also show you how to create a situational analysis and an outline. So this I'm just going to do from a very high level. Day 2, the path to competent, and day 2, that's going to be another live webinar. So I'm going to go through that in greater detail. And then another live webinar we're going to do is time management and day 3. So again, I'm going to go into this in much greater detail. So when we talk about your approach for day 1, think of your timing and dividing it into 4 buckets. So the first is to allocate approximately 60 minutes to reading the case, creating your situational analysis, and your outline. Take 15 minutes, and during that time that you're reflecting, is make sure that you're ordering your requireds and you're allocating time for each of those requireds. Very important activity. You need to not only allocate the time, but stick to the time because again, you need to complete all of the assessment opportunities to your best ability within the time you're given. About 150 minutes would be to write your response, and then about 15 minutes for review so that you can go back, do a quick check, make sure that you've done everything that management has asked you when it comes to your overall recommendations, that you've hit all of the key things that you need to do. And again, I'll go into that in much greater detail in the day 1 webinar. One of the important things for day 1, because again, you're being tested on your strategic thinking and your ability to understand the internal and external environment, is creating a situational analysis. But one of the things candidates do is they create it and then they some of them they treat it as an independent document. No, it should be used as a checklist. Whatever information you have there should be the most important information and are relative and relevant when you're performing the analysis of the different options. Now, there are certain factors that you need to memorize from the Capstone 1 case. And that's the company's mission, vision, values, and the industry's key success factors. The great news is during the day 1 webinar, I'm going to share that information that you should memorize. Yes, you will have access to the Capstone 1 case, but you don't want to spend a lot of time flipping through those pages. That's like 60 some pages. You want to make sure that that information is top of mind. The good news is that when you are including those relevant case facts from your situational analysis into your quantitative and qualitative analysis, that the same factor could be counted more than once. The caution is, and I will emphasize this again later, is that candidates sometimes only focus on whether implementing that option is aligned with the company's mission or vision. In most instances, it's at least partially aligned. So it's not a differentiating factor if all of them are partially aligned with the company's mission and vision. And again, I'll go into that in greater detail. So here are some comments from the Board of Examiners. What are the expectations when it comes to the situational analysis? Well, to highlight those internal factors, the company's mission, vision, values, their strengths, their weaknesses, the external factors, so the key industry trends, the opportunities, the threats, the key success factors, the ones that are most relevant to the business decisions that they need to make. Always include any significant changes that have taken place since Capstone 1 case. So focus when you're creating your SWOT, focus on what's happening in the day 1 case. That always takes priority. Identify the company's objectives. What are their goals? What do they want to achieve? Because every time you're analyzing those options, you need to consider, you need to discuss, will implementing that option help the board achieve? Will they achieve it? Or will it hinder? In other words, will it actually make, you know what? It'll decrease revenue or it'll decrease their operating profit margin when their goal is to increase it. To recognize any predominant, overarching, or significant issues. And I'm going to go into greater detail about that. So, day 1 design, it is designed to allow candidates to demonstrate a high level of professional skills, that you determine what are the most relevant factors. So, not all qualitative factors are equal. It's your job as a consultant to determine what are the ones that are most relevant when it comes to making strategic decisions. Means that you need to apply professional judgment. You need to be able to synthesize that information because you're given a lot of new options that are available. So that you need to show that you're able to think on your feet. So here are some examples of predominant overarching issues that the Board of Examiners refer to that impact at the entity level. The entity level, what that means is it impacts many of the decisions, the strategic decisions that the company makes, the operational decisions. So I'm going to list some of these. And again, in the day 1 webinar, I'll go in greater detail. So poor communication, there's conflicting objectives, there's conflict of interest. Maybe with the governance structure, one shareholder has whole voting control. So if they're not on board, that option isn't going to, it's going to be very difficult to convince that person to implement that option. Lack of long-term range planning. There's a supply or production constraint. If there is a constraint, you must always, you must always discuss the impact of implementing that option will have on that constraint. That's critical. When you're providing your overall recommendations, you should never exceed that constraint. If you do, your recommendations are not viable. Going concern, there could be significant financing constraints. There could be limited cash to invest in strategic options. Again, if they have $2 million to invest, you cannot exceed that capital that's available. Be on the lookout when you're looking at the financial, if it is any financial information's given to you about the company's current financial situation. Is there limited cash or will there be limited cash because there's a repayment of debt or a repurchase of share? Is there a reputational risk that's going to have a negative impact on the company's reputation? If there is, that could be an undirected or an undisclosed assessment opportunity you need to talk about. And you need to provide an overall recommendation. That needs to be addressed first. Limited management expertise and or time. Lack of focus on core business. Lack of innovation. The inability to reduce costs. The commercial, competitive advantage is eroding. Unrealistic timelines or downturn in the economy. If you take a moment and reflect, all of these, if they exist, or some of these exist, or one of these exists, they should be identified in your SWOT analysis. So these would be either significant weaknesses or significant threats. And every time you analyze an option, you should talk about the impact to the significant overarching issue because it could be a very important pro reason why you should implement the option, reason why you shouldn't, and it also needs to be carefully considered when you're providing your overall recommendations. So here are some comments from the board reports, the Board of Examiners, when it comes to strong performance. So strong responses, they identified these predominant overarching issues and they explained the impact. They displayed a greater depth of understanding and they highlighted that in their analysis of the strategic options. So again, if there's limited cash, you need to talk about that every single time you analyze a strategic option. When it comes to your overall recommendations, maybe 3 out of the 4 options or 3 out of the 5 options might make sense, but you might recommend to not implement one of them because of it's not using the cash most effectively or it exceeds the cash that's available, the capital that's available. Strong responses identified and provided in-depth discussions of the most important decision factors. They provided a valuable quantitative analysis to support their recommendations. Your analysis that you perform should provide the board with some information of how, will implementing that option, will it have a positive impact on the company's ability to achieve its objectives? If you struggle determining the appropriate quantitative analysis to perform, in the time management and day 3, I go through quite a few quantitative tools. So you want to make sure that you attend that live or that you watch that video. They prioritize the strategic recommendations. They explained why one alternative should be pursued over another. And they considered, the impact to the objectives and they considered the impact to the overarching issues. So let me just give you an example before I go to the weak uh, responses. So for example, if a significant weakness is that there's limited management time, and normally that's mentioned more than once. It's important. That could very much be an undirected assessment opportunity. So talk about that as a weakness, have it identified under your SWOT analysis. When you're analyzing each of the strategic options, discuss whether it impacts management's time. Make sure that, okay, so some of the implications are that, operational, there could be some issues, some errors from a strategic perspective. They might not be focused on their core business. So there's a lot of implications. You need to provide recommendations. When you provide your overall recommendations, if management time is limited, you need to provide, and that needs to be addressed first. Why? Because if it's limited, if they're having a hard time doing what they need to do now, it's going to be almost impossible to implement some of the recommendations you're going to give. So that is your first recommendation that you should provide, whether it's hire, additional or another senior manager, or whether it's add to the board of directors. And then when you're looking at the strategic options and your overall recommendations, again, carefully consider what the impact is. Maybe your first recommendation is going to be because it's going to free up management's time, and that's why you're recommending it first. Weak responses, what they did when it came to their SWOT analysis is they just regurgitated the case facts that were given to them. They didn't answer that question, so what? What is the potential positive or negative impact to the company? When it came to the overall financial performance, which is part of your situational analysis, they didn't talk about the implications. Again, why is that information important? If they have limited cash, why is that important? The why is, the implication is because it limits the number and the types of options that they could implement. When it came to integrating, so including information from their situational analysis, they did it very superficially. Sometimes it was irrelevant, sometimes it was incorrect. And even when they talked about that implementing a particular option was aligned with the company's mission or vision, they just said it was aligned. They didn't describe how. You have to answer the question, how, when it comes to alignment for mission or vision or values. When it came to the quantitative analysis, unstructured, it's very difficult to follow, and didn't perform the correct analysis. Again, be guided by what are the board's objectives. So if the objective is to increase profit margin to 17%, then try and calculate profit margin. Also be guided by the information that you're given. When it came to conclusions and overall recommendations, weak response didn't step back and consider those overarching issues. So again, if management time is limited, you should have a recommendation on how to free up some time, but still, does it make sense to recommend 3 options? Maybe it doesn't. Most likely it doesn't. So if your overall recommendations are not credible and viable, that will result in a fail. Because again, you're being tested on your ability to provide sound, strategic recommendations and advice. So let's talk about your approach for day 2. When it comes to day 2, it's structured very different. First of all, I want to warn you, day 2, the case looks very long. It can be 50 to 60 pages or greater. I know the first thing you're going to do is there's good, anxiety is going to hit because you're going to be looking at all those pages. I want to go through the table of contents and show you because not all of that is information you need to go through. So first of all, you will be given background information, and that applies for all roles. But even within that information, whether it's background information or common information that applies for everyone, not everything is applicable for you. There's specific requirements for your role. So the first thing is, what are your requirements for your role? And then look at that common information. And then, of course, there are role-specific appendices. So your role, it's all done by alphabetical order. So audit and assurance is going to be first. Who cares what performance management candidates, what their expectations are? You're not going to look at that information at all. It really doesn't matter. Just focus on what you need to do. So when it comes to time allocation, so 75 minutes approximately to read the case, to create your outline. And then take that 15 minutes again to make sure that you're ordering your required and allocating the time. About 195 minutes to write your response. And again, save some time so that you can quickly go back and make sure that you've done everything that you've needed to do. So some of the key success factors when it comes to day 2, number 1, know your role well. Remember, you are being tested. The proficiency level that you're being tested at is for the elective. So it's very different. The expectation is much higher than if you were being tested at the core level. So you need to know your role well. What are the testable items that are identified under that knowledge list in the competency map? Know how your role integrates with your core competencies, so financial reporting and management accounting. So for example, audit and assurance. There's a very close link with financial reporting and audit and assurance. When it comes to performance management, there's a very close link between strategy and governance. Many of the quantitative analysis are management accounting analysis. So if you're enrolled in Capstone 2, one of the things that we do in day 2 in the module workshop is we go through and identify some of those tasks that are very much linked from financial reporting that, are linked to audit insurance or from management accounting and performance management, for example. It is critical that you know how to shift through that relevant and irrelevant background and common information. So again, when I do the path to competent in day 2, I'm going to show you that start with the requireds so that you know what you need to do before you go to the common information, because the common information is for everyone and there's information in there that you don't need. So you first need to know, what are you being asked to do? So I'm going to go through some recent comments from the different Board of Examiners reports when it comes to the common requireds. So these are requireds that every single candidate rates, and they are a combination of management accounting and financial reporting. So when it comes to from a quantitative perspective for management accounting, strong candidates, so those strong responses incorporated case facts. They chose the appropriate quantitative tools and then made the appropriate adjustments. I always say, be on the lookout for the narrative. If there's any quantitative information, make sure you put it in your outline because there's a good chance you're going to miss it and you're going to need it for your quantitative analysis. On the flip side, for weak responses, what happened is candidates fell into that trap and they devoted most of their time to performing their quantitative analysis. And what that meant is they had limited time to perform their qualitative analysis. So here's another fundamental principle. You're not going to pass CFE if you're spending all your time on quants and not and limited time in your qualitative. You need to meet the expectation for both your quantitative and qualitative. They didn't integrate relevant case facts, or they incorporated that information incorrectly. When I think about this, at that point, it all relates back to creating an efficient and effective outline. Are you extracting the relevant case facts? And they didn't use the appropriate quantitative tool. From a qualitative perspective, well, strong candidates, they not only restated the case fact, but they explained the implications. They answered that question, so what? They talked about, they answered the question, why is that factor a pro? Or why is it a con? What is the potential positive or negative impact to the company? They addressed the key risks. So they focused on the most important factors. And when they talked about the impact, they related it as much as they could back to the company's bottom line. When it came to breadth, they extracted more of the relevant case facts. So they did a better job when they were creating their outline of extracting the relevant information. From a weak response, they simply restated the case facts, did not answer that question, so what? Or they only provided a one-sided discussion, focusing only on the advantages or the disadvantages. As a CPA, we need to look at things objectively. We need to look at both the advantages and the disadvantages. They used a very unsuccessful strategy of, hey, volume over quality. So I'm going to put down as many case facts as I simply can, but I'm not. That will help you meet the breadth requirement, the number of appropriate qualitative factors, but that will not help you meet the depth requirement because you haven't addressed the so what. You haven't talked about why. What's the potential positive or negative impact to the company? This is a common issue. It is one of the top 3 reasons why candidates don't pass CFE. It is one of the easiest things to fix. So please, when you're writing your responses, make sure when you're writing a case fact, make sure, ask yourself, so what? What's the potential positive or negative impact? And include that. Even if you think it's obvious, a marker can't give you for credit for something that's not on the page. Weak response, they didn't meet the breadth requirement. One of the things I notice is candidates have this tendency of making up qualitative factors. They're, for 99.9% of the time, there's more than enough qualitative factors given in the case. And if you look at the common feedback guides that are used in Capstone 2, there's only one spot where they'll give you credit for something another other valid. So make sure you're extracting those relevant case facts. Don't spend all your time making up ones. Look at the information that was given to you. For financial reporting assessment opportunities. So strong candidates made sure that they used the appropriate reporting framework. If it's ASPE or IFRS, make sure you're using the right framework. If you don't, it's impossible to get a competent response. When it came to there were certain financial reporting issues that there were more than one issue, and they addressed them individually. So, for example, revenue recognition, I want to be very clear. When you look at the competency map, revenue recognition, proficiency level at the core level is A. You need to be very, very comfortable with revenue recognition. With not on CFE, it's not going to be the normal, or most likely it isn't going to be, if there's a revenue recognition, this is most likely going to be something that's easy. It's going to be something that is a little bit more complex. So have moderate complexity. So make sure that you're very comfortable with. Some of the things is there more than one performance obligation? There is, you need to address each of those individually. What about, if it looks at right of refusal, if you're looking at consignment, there's all kinds of different revenue recognition scenarios that you need to be very comfortable with. They made sure that they integrated the relevant case facts to support their analysis and their conclusion whether that criteria was met or not, and their recommendation was consistent. On the other hand, when it came to weak response, they they identified what the issue was, but they jumped right to the conclusion. There was limited analysis. Even if you have the right recommendation, if your analysis is not there, you will not achieve a competent response. The marker needs to understand how you arrived at your recommendation. So your analysis is very, very important. When it comes to day 3, your creating your outline is critical for every day. Day 3, it is extremely important. So plan to succeed. As a result, you should be allocating 25 to 30% of your total time for the case should be spent on reading the case, creating your outline, and planning. So that's allocating, determining your order of your required, and allocating your time. I know it seems counterintuitive. I'm going to be sharing a best practice with you for day 3 and how to create an electronic outline where you can turn that outline efficiently and effectively into your response because you need to address those required quickly. So I will talk about, you can do your outline either electronically or handwritten, and I'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both. We'll go into that in greater detail in upcoming webinars. So let me give you an example of the breakdown for day 3 cases for September and May of 2023. So in both instances, there were 3 cases. The times ranged anywhere from 70 minutes to 90 minutes, anywhere from 5 assessment opportunities to 7. So that meant you're reading, planning, creating your outline, that you were spending anywhere from 18 to 22 minutes, and then the rest of the time was allocated for writing. So again, your technical skill is important because that's the foundation, and then your ability to write a clear and concise response is going to be the difference in and helping you increase your chances of meeting those undisclosed number of competent responses because you've got a lot of assessment opportunities in a short period of time. Here are some additional resources, and these are the resources that I went through to create these webinars for the CFE support. So the CFE blueprint, the Board of Examiners reports. So I've gone through the last 7 years. So a lot of the best practices and where they've identified the challenges, I've extracted that information. Plus, all of you have access to the Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE. And under here, you have access to practice cases. So extract that information. Make sure that you practice those cases within the time frame that you're given. So again, at this point as you're watching, if you want to actually stop the recording and pull up that information now, because there's some great cases that you can practice, and they'll give you some sample responses, the solution, and the feedback guide. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to be competent. I want to review kind of the competencies and the proficiency level. I want to talk about the evaluation process for day 1, day 2, and day 3. And of course, let's make sure I give you some valuable resources. So as you know, there are 7 enabling competencies. And these are the competencies that you're displaying when you're reading the case, when you're creating your outline, when you're planning, and when you're formulating your response. Many of those competencies are managing self. So time management is critical. Adding value. So again, the adding value is explaining that so what? What's the potential positive or negative impact? Solving those problems and making decisions. And of course, effective communication, making sure that your response is clear and concise. There are those 6 technical competency areas that I've gone through several times now. There are 3 different proficiency levels. Level A, B, and C, where level A is the strongest. So let's kind of go through and summarize a little bit of what the expectation is. So level C is your ability to be able to explain, describe, demonstrate knowledge. And in many instances, this is kind of what the level you were being tested at when it came from university. Level B is about your ability to analyze the problem, draw some logical conclusions when it comes to routine transactions from a low to a moderate complexity. Level A is your ability to do what's required in level C and B. And most importantly, your ability to analyze problems in sufficient depth. So you need to be able to look at both routine and non-routine transactions with moderate complexity. So when you're looking at determining your study plan, and again, I talk about that in stress management. So if you haven't watched that webinar, make sure that you do. You need to focus on proficiency level A first, B, and then C. So here is some information and some comments from the Board of Examiners. And it talks about what they consider when it comes to routine versus non-routine and complex versus non-complex transactions. So in routine non-complex transactions, the candidate is expected to be able to perform at a higher level than non-routine and complex situations. And generally, the high complex non-routine situations are not testable. And those are identified in Appendix A of the CPA competency map. They provide you with specific examples that are not testable also. So as part of the fair pass process, the board always reflects and considers these particular points. And I want to highlight on the third bullet point, the level of difficulty for each assessment opportunity and each simulation. So each simulation is each case. So the test that they do is, again, they reflect and say, are we testing the candidate against the proficiency level that is expected of an entry-level CPA? And if that's not the case, then they will make appropriate adjustments and test you at the level of what the expectation is of an entry-level CPA. So let's talk about the evaluation process. So the marking guides, so the cases and the marking guides, those are created anywhere from 6 to 12 months before CFE. They're actually shared with both provincial and regional reviewers. And what the reviewers are doing is they are going to look at the simulations and they're going to look at the preliminary marking guides. And the Board of Examiners are looking for their feedback. So they're looking, and some of the people would be provincial representation, they could be academic individuals and or previous writers. They take the feedback that's provided into careful consideration, plus the feedback that's provided from team leaders, from senior markers, before they actually publish CFE. So let's look at in 2023, there were approximately 210 individuals that were chosen to participate in September 2024 CFE Evaluation Center. So these individuals were individuals who have strong marking experience, that were highly motivated, academic achievement, appropriate work experience, had personal references, and regional representation. So I want you to be assured that the individuals who are marking your response are highly qualified. Plus, the marking is supervised by CPA Canada Evaluation and International Assessment full-time board professional staff. So prior to any marking happening, there is anywhere from a 4 to a 6-day preliminary evaluation center. And so what's happening is the participants, they're going to review the marking guides. They're going to randomly pull some candidates' responses, and they're going to apply those marking guides. They're going to then sit down and determine if any changes are needed. If so, they're going to implement those changes before any of the responses are actually and formally marked. So it's very important to know that there's a very, robust process in place. Your team leaders and your assistant team leaders, they spend the bulk of their time on quality control and, looking at one upping if some of the responses, if there are some challenges or some discretions. Or sorry, not discretions, but some differences in assessments. So let's look at the day one evaluation process because we know that's done separately. So there's 4 outcomes a clear pass, a clear fail, a marginal pass, or a marginal fail. So every response is marked once. They use the borderline marking scheme, which means if a candidate is assessed as marginal pass or marginal fail, another individual will mark the response. If that assessment is different than the first assessment, then someone else, a senior marker, will mark that response and their assessment will become your final assessment. So again, if it's a marginal pass or marginal fail, it is looked and reviewed again by at least one other marker. So one of the things that they're doing is they also take a step back when it comes to day one and says, did the candidate step back and see the bigger picture? If there were significant overarching issues, did they consider it? Did they prioritize the issue? So again, they focused on the most relevant, the strongest qualitative factors to consider. Did they use both the quantitative and qualitative information to support their discussion and conclusion? Did they perform the appropriate quantitative analysis? Did they use sufficient case facts? So did they meet those integration? And did they communicate their ideas clearly and succinctly? When it comes to day two, the common assessment opportunities are marked separately by different individuals than your role assessment opportunities. Every paper is marked twice by different people. Every paper. So if there's any differences on any of the assessment opportunities, then an arbitrary is engaged and they determine whatever their assessment is your final overall assessment. Day three is marked using the borderline model also. So what happens is once day two has been marked at least twice, then they're going to put day two and day three results together. If a candidate has failed day three, then they will mark day three again. Okay? Because if they failed day three, which means that they've ended up failing the combined of day two and day three, they will mark day three again. So day three will be marked at least once. If you fail day three, it will be marked a second time. Again, to make sure that, they're wanting to ensure that there's consistency when it comes to marking and that there's great quality control and that they have looked through and examined your response in great detail. The additional resources that I provided and got a lot of this information from is again the CFE blueprint, the board reports. I also got a lot of information from the Common Final Examination and Competency Reference Evaluation methodology. Long name. That was all about what the passing profile is. So again, you're more than welcome to look up that information, but the key information is in this webinar and is also extracted and in the upcoming webinars. So I want to talk about if you're preparing for another attempt, or even if you're not, what are some of the key things that help you prepare? Make sure, the first thing I want to talk about is make sure that you've chosen the best role for day two for you. And what are the key areas to focus on? I know that probably at this point or shortly you will have picked your role. It's not too late to have a very important, very heart-to-heart conversation with yourself. So when it comes to the role, I shared this in the stress management, so important, I'm going to share it again, that there appears to be more candidates who do not seem to be comfortable with their chosen role for day two. Remember, the proficiency level is at the elective level. So the level of detail is considerably higher. So the Board of Examiners is encouraging you to select your role carefully. If you have, so statistic wise, if you've marginally passed, if you've taken the professional education program and you've marginally passed that elective, statistic wise, it's very difficult to pass your role, that level 3, unless you spend an awful lot of time in enhancing those skills. So when you're choosing your role, think about what are your strengths? What do you naturally do well? What field are you already working in that you already have experience? Okay? Because that increases your chances of being successful. I know some candidates say, well, I'd really like to, I'm hoping that maybe someday if I work for an accounting firm, I want to be able to sign off on audit. So therefore, I'm going to pick the audit and assurance role. Based on my experience with some of the candidates who are writing for the third time, if you're not working in that particular field, it's very difficult to pass because you don't have that practical experience and you haven't had an opportunity to build it as a strength. So when it comes to performance management, are you working? Are you planning to work in a role that has management accounting? That's primary. Finance, are you working or planning to choose a career around, where you provide investment and finance advice? Assurance, do you have experience in assurance? That makes a significant difference. Tax, is it a strength of yours? Do you have experience in tax? So again, take an opportunity to carefully consider that. When it comes to those of you who are rewriting, again, when it comes to day one, carefully review that automated feedback because they provide you with some wonderful information that will help you create your action plan. Did you meet the integration when it came to situational analysis? Did you use the right quantitative tool? Did you meet the breadth and depth for conclusion and recommendation? Did you kind of include the the available capital? Did you show them clearly that it didn't exceed? Did you talk about the interrelationships? All this stuff we're going to go into greater detail in the day one webinar. I wanted to show you this. This is a candidate's result. So level 1, if you notice, they failed. Decile means that they fell in decile 5, okay? So decile 1 is the top 10% and so on. If you notice, so level 2, they passed. Level 2, they passed management accounting, but they failed financial reporting. Level 3, they passed their role. Level 4, they met the expectations for the breadth, reaching competent or higher across all. So when I'm looking at this, already this is telling me that they met the minimum requirements for reaching competent for financial reporting, but a key area to focus on as you prepare to rewrite CFE is financial reporting. Okay, so again, there is a clear link between how well you do in both financial reporting, management, accounting, because of that pure math. There's very similar numbers, and your level 1. So what they have noticed is, the Board of Examiners, that there is a declining technical abilities, that candidates are avoiding those complex topics, and that they're focusing on, you know what, if it's previously been tested, then they've done some of those assessment opportunities. But if it hasn't been previously tested, candidates do extremely poorly. Don't assume that if you're enrolled in Capstone 2 and if you do all those assessment opportunities and you make sure that you know those well, that that will result in a pass. What is testable is based on the competency map. So candidates should expect a variety of issues with a variety of difficulty. You should ensure that you have a sufficient level of technical knowledge in all areas. And you should make sure that you're familiar with the reference schedule that's provided on the exam, because there's information there that you should or might need to use. So make sure you know what they're giving you. I talked about prioritizing course material. I'm just putting it here. I'm not going to go through it again, but go to that stress management because I show you how to sort because this is your syllabus. These are all of the items that are testable. And the knowledge list tells you what those specific tasks and activities are that you need to do. So as I finish this webinar, stress management, the recording is available. Understanding the CFE, the recording is available. There are 4 upcoming live webinars. So day 2 and Path to Competent is going to be on March the 30th. Day 3 and Time Management is going to be on March 31st. So day 2, I'm going to do a partial outline. Day 3, I'm going to do an outline on a day 3 case. I'm also going to do the quantitative tools, sorry. Day 1 for Carnet Bread, April the 8th. Day 1 for Viviana is April the 9th. Now the time is 4 p.m. Pacific time, so make appropriate adjustments for the time of where you're located. So if you're located in Atlantic, that would be 8 p.m. Please register for these live recordings, but the taped recordings will also be available to you, and you can find your registration and those recordings in D2L on the homepage for Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE or the Capstone 2 homepage. So thank you very much. I hope that you found this webinar helpful, and I really hope that I see you during the live webinars. Have a great day, everyone.